Well, South Africa's listed companies are the best run companies in the world with a real return on capital that is the highest in the world. The successful running of these companies by their well-paid CEOs has, however, caused South African politicians to call for a capping of their remuneration. And here to unpack this matter further is the CEO of Rebmormax, who's Sam Deuchar. Thanks so much, Sam, for joining us this afternoon. Are we ever going to see this issue off the table and out of the spotlight? Because of course it's a contentious issue. It's a debate that's been raging for the longest while, that CEOs, no matter where they're sitting, are simply overpaid.
I think it's come into focus in the last 4 or 5 years since we've had the sort of global pressure and global meltdown. So it's very topical at the moment. It's particularly topical because of what's going on in the EU environment. We've recently seen coverage to say they have an agreement on the table right now where they will look at capping variable pay for CEOs. So we take some reference in South Africa to that point. I think the implications of that have not been thought through properly. And I think South Africa will sit back and wait and see what happens in the EU environment and consider what the impact will be.
So to get the thinking going on it, let's take a closer look at the implications as you see it from, obviously one would assume, a negative perspective first.
Yes. Well, I think the negative perspective is very simple. If you take the opposition that the UK has at the moment to the EU agreement, I think they're quite nervous that the consequences haven't been thought through because they're the largest banking jurisdiction in Europe. And if the pressure on CEO remuneration remains as intense as the agreement proposes, where you're saying no more than 100% of bonuses will be paid on the base pay, you're going to push your CEO skill out of the country.
Or push those base pays higher.
Definitely will push the base pay higher, there's no question about it, which of course contributes to the cost element of the organisation, and that will push price, etc. So I think in our scenario, I was interested to see Pravin Gordhan last week did not start playing with our own tax rates, which would affect the executive level of our taxpayers, because they want to sit back and have a look and see what the implications will be, where we're looking at a very small group of people who, yes, earn a lot of money, but also do a huge amount for the economy and for the businesses that they run. I think a CEO's position is often overstated in terms of being a glorified position earning a lot of money. I think behind the scenes it's a lot harder than anyone anticipates.
Where the positives looking to be extracted from an endeavour like this is to address social inequalities that persist in a society. To what extent do you see this working to solve some of those social problems?
I think you've got to look at it in a very broad context. So there's clearly been a lot of excess in terms of CEO pay, both globally and in South Africa. And I think that's come through in the last 4 years because of the economic downturn that we've had. So the excesses of pay have come into very strong focus. And that's obviously been an issue now. We're all paying attention to it. So that type of issue is going to be something that will continue. That's not going to go away. But we can't punish a lot of people based on the way that a few people have operated. And so I think we need to be very careful about how we go and limit CEO pay in the future. My personal view is that there should be some form of self-regulation. And because there's been so much negative press around excessive CEO remuneration, I think you'll see more and more of that happening. But because of the social inequalities and the poverty we face in South Africa and those pressures, we're not going to just solve that by limiting a CEO's remuneration. They have a lot to contribute in terms of reducing the inequality in this country.
How do companies go about making sure that they fairly determine remuneration packages?
I think the most important thing is to make sure that they have a very strong board of directors and a remuneration committee that comes from that board of directors that is completely free of influence in terms of the CEOs. So that's the first thing. And I think if you look carefully at some of our South African companies, maybe that degree of influence, or there is a degree of influence, there's not enough independence that we should see in a remuneration committee. The second thing is it's not just all about profit. Yes, profit is the most important thing that a CEO is going to be remunerated on, there's no question. But there are other aspects. Social responsibility and the environment in which they operate socially is critical. Their leadership and people development skills, I think, are also very important to the way that we look at CEO in terms of the way they're remunerated.
Looking at the South African context and that context within which South African companies operate, to what extent do we have to take that context more so into consideration, given, for example, in the mining sector, the labor relations that are ongoing that we have to manage a little bit more effectively, one would assume, than some of our developed counterparts?
I think one of the things that we as companies in South Africa haven't done well enough is understand the communities in which those companies operate. And if you look at some of the mining challenges that we faced and the labour relations issues that we faced in the last 4 or 5 months, that comes into very clear focus. So companies need to work in tighter engagement with the communities in which they operate. And I think that will contribute to better labour relations and better engagement.